The pounding came at the worst hour of the night, the hour when nothing good knocks, and Dr. Sarah Pell was awake before she was upright, because a frontier doctor learns to surface from sleep, already reaching for her bag. She had been the only physician within 40 miles of the Wyoming town of Cold Spring for 3 years, ever since she had come west with a medical degree no Eastern hospital would honor, and found a place too desperate for doctors to care that this one wore skirts. She had set bones and pulled bullets, and birthed babies, and buried the ones she could not save, and she had learned that the night knocks were the ones that mattered, and that you answered them, or you found a different profession. She opened the door to a man slumped against the frame, held up by a second man she did not know, and the smell of blood reached her before her eyes adjusted. The wounded one was young, perhaps 30, grey as ash, a dark stain spreading across his side that told her most of what she needed to know before she touched him. The other man would not meet her eyes. He said only, "He needs fixing, we can pay," and there was something in the way he said it, something hunted, that made the small hairs on Sarah's arms stand up. She did not ask questions. That was a rule she had made early. A doctor in a hard country, who asked how the bullet got there, did not stay a doctor long, and besides, the wound did not care about the story. She got him onto her table, and got the lamp lit, and got her hands in the work, and the second man melted back into the dark and was gone before she had the shirt cut away, leaving her alone with a stranger bleeding out on her table, and no idea on God's earth who he was. Sarah Pell had not chosen the West for its romance. She had chosen it for the plain reason that it was the only place that would let her practice. She had finished near the top of her class at a women's medical college that the established hospitals treated as a curiosity, and she had spent a year watching male classmates with worse marks take the positions she was refused, and she had finally understood that respectability and opportunity were, for a woman with a scalpel, pointed in opposite directions. So she had gone where the need outran the prejudice, to a territory so short of doctors it could not afford to care about the doctor's sex. And she had built, by sheer stubborn competence, a practice and a place and a hard-won grudging respect. 3 years of it had made her good and made her guarded. She had lost patients she should have saved, and saved patients no one believed she could. And she had learned to keep a wall between her heart and her table, because a doctor who grieves every loss in a hard country does not last, and Sarah Pell intended to last. The wall had held for 3 years. It had held against dying children and ruined men, and the slow attrition of a town that needed her hands and resented needing them. She did not know, opening the door that night to a bleeding stranger and a hunted companion, that the wall had finally met the thing it would not hold against. The bullet had gone in below the ribs and not come out, and that meant a long, ugly piece of work by lamplight, probing for lead in a man who drifted in and out of sense and called, in his fever, for people who were not there. Sarah worked for 3 hours. She got the bullet. She got the bleeding stopped. By the time the grey light came up, she had done everything that could be done, and whether he lived was now a question for his own body to answer. And she sat down in the chair beside the table and watched him breathe and waited. It was full morning when the trouble announced itself. The marshal of Cold Spring, a decent tired man named Hollis, came to her door with a paper in his hand and an apology already on his face. There had been a robbery 2 towns over, a bank, a guard shot, not dead but close, and the gang scattered, and one of them, the paper said, hit and bleeding, and described as a young man, dark-haired, perhaps 30. Hollis looked past Sarah at the figure on her table, and his decent, tired face went hard. "You know what he is," Hollis said. "I know what he is," Sarah said. "He's a patient. He came to my door bleeding, and I am a doctor. You can have him when he can stand." "Not before," Hollis argued. Sarah did not move. She stood in her own doorway, and told the marshal that she had taken an oath that did not have an exception for men she disapproved of, that the day she started choosing which bleeding people deserved her hands was the day Cold Spring had no doctor at all, and that he could arrest a man who could not yet sit up, but he would do it over her objection and in front of the whole town, and that the whole town might have feelings about a marshal hauling a half-dead man out of the doctor's own surgery. Hollis, who was not a cruel man, only a tired one, looked at her a long moment, and then put his paper away, and said he would be back when the man could stand, and that she was a stubborn woman, and that he meant it as a compliment and a complaint in equal measure. She had a rule against asking how the bullet got there, and she had a deeper rule under it, which was that the work did not care about the worth of the patient. A bleeding body was a problem of anatomy and time did not consult the wanted posters. She had pulled lead out of men she liked and men she did not, and once, memorably, out of a man who had threatened her the week before, and she had done all of it with the same steady hands, because the day she let her opinion of a man into her surgery was the day she stopped being a doctor and started being a judge, and the territory had judges enough and doctors too few. So when the marshal stood in her doorway with his wanted poster and his hard, decent face and told her what the man on her table was, Sarah felt the rule settle in her like a spine. She was not protecting an outlaw. She was protecting the only thing that made her a doctor instead of an executioner, which was the principle that her hands did not get to choose. She said as much to Hollis, and she believed it, and it was true. What she did not yet admit, even to herself, was that somewhere in 3 hours of lamplit work over a grey-faced stranger who called for a dead wife and child in his fever, the principal had picked up a passenger, and the passenger was the beginning of caring whether this particular man lived, and not for the principal's sake at all. He woke on the second day, and the first thing the outlaw did was apologize, which was not what Sarah expected from a bank robber. He woke, took in the room and the bandages, and the woman in the chair, and said, in a voice like gravel, "I'm sorry. For the trouble. For the hour, you should have let the other fella take me on down the road. You'd be dead in a ditch," Sarah said. "Yes," he agreed, as if that were a reasonable outcome he had already made peace with, and something in the flatness of it caught at her against her will. His name, he told her, was Wesley Crane, and he did not bother to deny what he was, which she also had not expected. He had been riding with the gang 2 years. He did not make excuses for it. When she finally broke her own rule, on the 4th day, and asked him how a man came to it, he told her plainly, no self-pity in it, a failed homestead, a dead wife and a dead child in the same hard winter, the farm gone to the bank that held the note, and a young man with nothing left and nothing to lose, falling in with the kind of men who find such young men useful. "I'm not telling you so you'll feel for me," he said. "I made my choices. I'm telling you because you asked, and you pulled a bullet out of me, and you're owed an honest answer." The recovery was slow, the way a gut wound's recovery always is, and the slowness threw them together day on day, and intimacy grew the way it grows between the tended and the one who tends, in the small, unguarded moments. She changed his bandages, and he learned the gentleness in her hands. He told her about the homestead, and she learned the man under the reputation. She read to him in the evenings because he could not yet sit up to read himself, and he listened the way a man listens who has not been read to since childhood, and somewhere in those evenings Dr. Sarah Pell, who had armored herself for 3 years against caring too much about patients who might die, felt the armor give. The fever talk was what undid her guard, in the end. A patient cannot perform for you when he is out of his sense, and what came out of Wesley Crane in the fever was not the hard, flat outlaw of his waking hours, but a younger man, a man calling soft names into the dark, a man apologizing to a woman named Mary and a child named for him, asking them to forgive him for not keeping them, for the cold, for the winter, for the bank. Sarah sat by the table through the worst of it, and heard a man grieve in his delirium for a family 3 years dead, and the wall she had built against caring developed. That night, a crack she could not later mortar over. When the fever broke, and the hard waking man came back, she found she could no longer fully believe in him, because she had heard the other one. The outlaw who made no excuses and expected nothing, and had made peace with dying in a ditch, was, she now knew, a costume worn over a man who had once had everything that mattered, and lost it in a single winter, and decided, rather than break, to stop wanting. She had seen that choice in patients before, the choice to feel nothing rather than feel the loss. She had, if she was honest, made a smaller version of it herself, behind her own wall. Recognizing it in him was the most dangerous thing that could have happened to her professional distance, and it had already happened, and there was no taking it back. She read to him in the evenings from whatever was at hand, medical journals when nothing else was, and once a volume of poems left behind by a previous tenant. And Wesley, who said he had not been read to since he was a boy at his mother's knee, listened with a stillness that was almost painful to watch. A grown hard man, holding very carefully to something he had not known he missed. She caught herself choosing the gentler poems. She caught herself reading longer than the light strictly allowed. She told herself it was good for a recovering patient to be kept calm and engaged, and that was even true, and it was also not the reason, and she was a clear-eyed enough woman to know the difference, and a frightened enough one to keep pretending she did not. The town knew by the second week that the doctor was harboring the wounded outlaw, and the town had opinions, and the opinions came to her door in the form of stiff visits and cold shoulders, and one anonymous note shoved under the surgery door that she burned without finishing. She understood the town's fear. A man who had ridden with a gang that shot a bank guard was not a thing a frightened town wanted healed and loose among them. She understood it, and she did not yield to it, and the not yielding cost her, in trade and in friendship, more than she let Wesley see. He saw it anyway. He was an observant man, which she supposed was a survival trait in his line. He saw the trade fall off and the visitors stop, and he understood what keeping him was costing her. And one evening he said, "You should let Hollis take me. You've done more than anyone could ask. This town is yours, and I'm wrecking it for you, and I'm not worth a doctor." "That's not your call," Sarah said. "Whether you're worth it. That's the whole trouble with you, Wesley Crane. You've decided you're a thing to be thrown away, and you keep trying to get everyone around you to agree, and I will not." He was quiet at that. Then he said the thing that changed the shape of everything between them. He told her that the gang had not scattered as cleanly as the marshal believed, that the leader, a man named Boyd, did not leave loose ends, and that a wounded man left at a doctor's was a loose end, and that Boyd would come, not for Wesley's sake, but to be sure Wesley said nothing to no one, and that when he came, he would not be gentle about who else was in the house. "So you see," Wesley said, "why you should let Hollis take me. In a cell, I'm the law's problem. Here, I'm yours, and Boyd's, and that's no place for you." The town's turning against her was slow, and then not slow. First, the Hendersons stopped sending their boy for his weekly visit. Then the mercantile was suddenly always short of the things she ordered. Then the church ladies, who had never warmed to a woman doctor, but had at least been civil, stopped being even that. And Sarah understood that she was being shown the price of her stubbornness in the only currency a small town has, which is belonging. She had spent 3 years earning a grudging place in Cold Spring, and she was spending it all on a man she had known 3 weeks, and she did the arithmetic clearly and made the same choice anyway, every day, which told her something about herself she was not sure she was ready to know. Wesley watched the price mount and tried to make her stop paying it, which was, she would think later, the first wholly unselfish thing she had watched him do, and the proof that the man in the fever was the true one. An outlaw who had made peace with throwing his own life away does not, by rights, care what his sheltering costs a stranger. Wesley cared. He counted her losses for her, and laid them out, and begged her to let the marshal take him, not to save himself, but to stop the bleeding of her standing in the town. And the more he begged her to give him up for her own good, the more certain she became that she was not going to, because a man worth giving up does not spend his recovery trying to spare the one who saved him. By the 3rd week he could stand, and then he could walk, and then he could have ridden, and the fact that he could have ridden and did not sat in the surgery between them, like a question neither would ask out loud. He stayed past the point of needing care. He told himself it was to be sure the wound did not reopen. Sarah told herself the same. They both knew it was a lie, and neither corrected it. He took to doing things around the place, the things a strong man does without being asked, mending the surgery's broken step, splitting wood, fixing the well rope that had frayed dangerous, and Sarah came to expect his quiet presence in a way that frightened her, because she had built a life on needing no one, and here she was, listening for the sound of his axe in the yard, and feeling something settle in her when she heard it. It was Wesley who said it first, because he was a man who had learned that the things you do not say are the things that get people killed. "I have to go," he told her one evening. "You know it. Boyd's out there, and every day I stay is a day I bring him closer to your door. I can ride now. I should ride tonight, north, and be a stranger's problem in some other territory, and you should forget the man who bled on your table and get your town back." "Is that what you want?" Sarah asked. "It's not about what I want," he said. "I gave up wanting things the winter I buried my family. Wanting things is for people who get to keep them." "That," said Sarah Pell, "is the most cowardly thing I have ever heard a brave man say." And she watched it land on him, and she did not take it back. The thing about Boyd that Wesley told her changed the air in the surgery. Up to that night the danger had been abstract, a wanted poster, a marshal's patience, the slow social cost. Now it had a name and a habit, a man who did not leave loose ends, and a wounded Confederate at a doctor's house was the loosest end of all. Sarah understood that Wesley was not telling her this to frighten her into anything. He was telling her so that she could choose with open eyes, which was, she was learning, simply how the man operated. He laid the true cost in front of you and let you decide. He had done it with his own history, and he did it now with the danger. And there was an honesty in it that she had stopped expecting from anyone, let alone from a man the law wanted. "Why tell me at all?" she asked him. "You could have ridden off in the night and let me think you ungrateful. I'd have been safer not knowing Boyd was coming." "No," Wesley said. "You'd have been asleep and unwarned when he came, because he's coming whether I'm here or not. He doesn't know I haven't talked. Far as Boyd knows, the doctor who pulled his man's bullet heard everything that man said in his fever, and that makes you a loose end too now. So you're not safer for me gone. You're just alone for it." And Sarah Pell, who had faced down a marshal in her own doorway without flinching, felt fear for the first time in the whole affair, not for the man on her table, but because of how much she had come to mind the thought of facing anything alone again. Boyd came 3 nights later, and he did not knock. Sarah woke to the sound of the surgery door breaking, and a lamp flaring, and 3 men in her front room, and a hard-faced man she knew at once was Boyd, standing over the place where Wesley slept, a pistol already drawn. What Boyd had not counted on was that Wesley Crane was not where he was supposed to be. The wounded man had taken to sleeping in the chair by the surgery door, between the entrance and the doctor. A placement Sarah had thought was about the draft and understood now was about exactly this. And Wesley came up out of that chair as the door broke with the frontier doctor's own bone saw in his hand, because it was the nearest thing, and put himself between Boyd and the inner room where Sarah slept. What followed was short and ugly, and Sarah, who had spent 3 years putting bodies back together, would not describe it afterward in detail to anyone. It is enough to say that Wesley Crane had ridden 2 years with hard men and had learned what they knew, and that he used it that night not to take but to defend, and that when the Marshal Hollis arrived with 3 armed townsmen, roused by the noise, the fight was already decided, and Boyd and 1 of his men were down, and the 3rd had run, and Wesley was bleeding again from the side that had only just healed, standing over Sarah's doorway swaying, having spent the strength she had given him back, keeping the gang out of her room. Hollis looked at the scene a long time. He looked at the dead outlaw who had broken down a door in the night, and at the wounded one who had stood between that door and the town's only doctor. And the decent, tired marshal did a piece of arithmetic that the wanted poster had not allowed for. "The man on my paper," Hollis said slowly, "rode with Boyd. The man in front of me killed Boyd defending Doc Pell." He was quiet. Those might not be the same man anymore. The 2 years he stayed past his wound healing were the strangest of Sarah's life, and, she would admit much later, the happiest stretch she had known since medical school, which was a terrible thing to feel about a season lived under threat. But there it was. The surgery had a sound it had never had, the sound of an axe in the yard, of a strong man fixing things that had been broken so long she had stopped seeing them. She had lived alone and capable for 3 years, and called it freedom, and she had been telling a version of the truth, but it was not the whole truth, and the whole truth arrived in the form of how much she listened for that axe. When Wesley finally said he had to go, she heard her own 3 years of armor in his voice, the same flat decision to want nothing rather than risk losing it, and that was why his cowardice made her so angry. It was her cowardice, worn by someone else, and watching him reach for it was like watching herself, and she could forgive it in herself, barely, but she could not bear to watch him choose it. Wanting things is for people who get to keep them, he had said, and she had called it the most cowardly thing a brave man ever said, and the reason it came out so hard was that she had said it to herself, in different words, every year she had spent behind her wall, and she was only now, watching him, hearing how false it had always been. It was not as simple as a marshal's mercy, of course. There was the matter of the bank and the guard, and 2 years of riding with Boyd. And the law is the law, and does not dissolve, because a man did one brave thing at the end. But the guard had lived, it turned out, and would say at the hearing that the young, dark-haired robber had been the one who argued against shooting, and the one who left water for him after. And Hollis would testify to the night Boyd died, and who died defending whom. And the territory, which was short on doctors and shorter on second chances, would weigh it all and hand down a sentence of time served plus labor, the labor to be performed, by arrangement that raised eyebrows in 3 counties, in service to the town of Cold Spring, under the supervision of its physician. So Wesley Crane did his sentence with an axe and a hammer and a strong back, rebuilding the surgery step he had first mended as a guest, raising a proper barn behind it, becoming over 2 slow years a fixture the town stopped flinching at, and then started nodding to, and then, the way towns do, quietly claimed as their own, the way they had claimed the lady doctor, who would not be told whom to heal. They married in the spring of the 3rd year, in the surgery that had been the whole geography of their knowing each other, with the Marshal Hollis standing up for the groom and half the town that had once shoved a note under the door now crowded in with pie and apology. Sarah Pell kept her name and her practice, because she had not come 600 miles and faced down a marshal in her own doorway to become anyone's appendage, and Wesley would not have wanted it otherwise. On the worst nights, the night knocks still came, and Sarah Pell still surfaced from sleep, already reaching for her bag, but she did not answer the door alone anymore. There was a man who slept between the entrance and the inner room. By old habit he never broke, and who rose with her into the bad hours, and who had learned that wanting things was not only for people who got to keep them, but also, sometimes, for people stubborn enough to be told they were worth keeping, and to finally, against all their own arguments, believe it. She would not describe the fight afterward, but she dreamed it for years. The door breaking, the lamp, the hard-faced man with the drawn pistol standing over an empty cot, confused for the half-second that decided everything, because Wesley was not in the cot. He had slept in the chair by the door every night for weeks, and she had thought it was the draft, and it had never been the draft. It had been a man who had failed once to stand between the people he loved and a hard winter, positioning himself, every single night, to not fail that way again. What she let herself remember was the after. Wesley swaying in her broken doorway, bleeding through the side she had stitched, having spent the strength she gave him to keep 3 armed men out of the room where she slept, Boyd down. The town's men arriving too late to help, and just in time to witness, and the Marshal Hollis standing in the wreckage doing the arithmetic out loud, that the man on his wanted poster and the man bleeding in the doorway might not, after all, be the same man anymore. Sarah had gone to Wesley and put her hands back into the wound she had closed 3 weeks before, and he had looked at her and said, "Told you, loose ends," and tried to make it a joke, and she had told him to shut up and let her work, and her hands, for the first time in her steady professional life, had not been entirely steady, and they both knew why. The town that had shoved a note under her door came to the wedding because towns are like that, quick to fear and quick to forget they feared, and because a man who kills the outlaw threatening their doctor in the dead of night rewrites his own reputation faster than any amount of good behavior could. The same church ladies who had stopped being civil brought their best dishes. The mercantile owner, who had been mysteriously short of her orders, gave them a set of good knives as a gift, which Sarah found grimly funny given the surgery, and which Wesley used for 30 years to carve the Sunday roast. People are not consistent. Sarah had learned that on her table long before she learned it at her own wedding. They fear you and need you, and resent the need and forgive you all at once, and the trick is to keep your own course steady through the weather of their changing, which she had always done, and which she taught, by example, to the man who married her.